Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Do us a favor, mash that subscribe button, comment down below, upvote the video, and of course, hit the bell for notifications every time we release a new video. I am here with John Garcia. We're going to talk about Mississippi recruiting, but first, I do want to let you know that LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. John, welcome back, man. We're going to talk about the wide receivers, I think, today. Does that sound good to you?
Absolutely. It's a good crop of them for sure. It seems like every year there is, but this one for sure.
Yeah, and it's also a good episode for Ole Miss fans that are watching this video because in the state, Ole Miss has turned into a little bit of a wide receiver U. And honestly, other than what's going on at Alabama and LSU, they could honestly spread that out even further because of the names that have come through that place. Let's start out with a name that we haven't really talked about. Let's talk about JJ Harrell. What do you know about him?
Yeah, JJ out of Sardis, big receiver listed at, 6'2", 180 pounds or so. And he's smooth. I would say there's still a lot of room for him to improve from a physicality and polish standpoint, but the natural playmaking is there for him. He's a guy who can certainly take the top off of a defense, but he's just as comfortable working underneath. And that's what you like to see at the high school level, kind of just dominate whenever the football is in your vicinity. So just as likely to go deep as he is to catch it short and make some moves. He's very sudden, very lanky. He'll probably remind some folks a little bit of a Jonathan Mingo type. Not as physical yet. I think that's the next evolution for JJ, and his recruitment's kind of reflective of that. It's still on the up and up. He's beginning to take more and more recruiting visits. Ole Miss, of course, right in the thick of it for him at this point. He's an ascending talent. I think he's one where it's not so obvious to see, but the more you look into it, the more you're like, okay, he's got enough to work with, and a lot of SEC offensive coordinators and wide receiver coaches feel the same, and that's why he's kind of in the thick of his ascent as opposed to maybe some of the more established receivers in the state. But it won't be long before he's right on par with those guys in terms of attention and even kind of taking the next step in his recruiting process. But it does seem a little early at this point on that side of the coin, football-wise. A lot to like here. Again, lengthy, wide catch radius, good after the catch, and developing before the catch. So that's kind of where you want receivers to be with a year left of high school ball and obviously some college ball after that.
What schools are we looking at coming in for JJ?
Yeah, well, of course, the Egg Bowl schools are right in the thick of it. He visited Alabama in January. That'll be interesting to see. Do they begin to push at some point? Tennessee is kind of, to me, the wild card here. Obviously, from a receiver standpoint, Tennessee is selling a lot more volume than they previously have based on what they did in 2022, including the Biletnikoff Award winning receiver there in Jalen Hyatt. So selling roles in that offense is obviously going to impress a lot of high schoolers. So I think Tennessee is an interesting program to keep an eye on here. But otherwise, naturally, I'm always going to default to Ole Miss and State for sure.
Yeah. Do you want to hear my Joe Milton joke? I've got a pretty good Joe Milton joke.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
So if you need a quarterback to throw the ball 40 yards, Joe Milton is your guy. But if you need a quarterback to throw the ball 20 yards, Joe Milton can throw the ball 40 yards. If you need a quarterback to throw it 60 yards, he can throw the ball 40 yards. But just do that over and over again. It's pretty. But hey, he can throw an orange 100 yards or something like that. It's pretty amazing. But yeah,
they got some good QBs behind them too, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nico Imaliava, I think is how you pronounce it. I heard it in the Polynesian Bowl and thought I got the pronunciation right, and I'd all forgotten. I think it's Imaliava, right?
Yep, Imaliava, yes, sir.
Okay. All right, so next two are two wide receivers that we've actually talked about before, and honestly, in the next couple of months, they probably could pop. A commitment could happen from one of these two. Number one would be Braylon Burnside, a wide receiver out of Starkville, Mississippi. Last time Ole Miss got a receiver out of Starkville, Mississippi, it worked out pretty well. He's a good player. He's the consensus top wide receiver in the state, but depending on the recruiting service, he might not be. That's how good this class is.
Yeah, he's a little bit more easier to see from an explosive and production standpoint compared to Harrell. He can certainly work underneath. He works better in the margins, but it's really the explosiveness. It is the burst that Burnside provides that has him so coveted, and that's been apparent for quite some time. So I do think all of that, not to mention just the spotlight that's always on Starkville, another state championship to their name here recently, with him being a big part of it, and he's got a lot of volume, to his game as well. Listed at 6 foot 185, looks bigger. He kind of looks like Debo Samuel running around out there. Can do a little bit of everything to the point where I think some schools are starting to talk about defense with him. Can he factor into the return game? I mean, he can do so many things that it kind of leaves it as a bit of an open slate for him. But as you mentioned, caught on earlier, a lot more offers earlier, well over a dozen that he's navigating through as well. And kind of like we continue to say, this is an Egg Bowl type of battle. Mississippi State does not want, they can't afford to continue to lose recruitments at a Starkville high school for pretty obvious reasons. Alabama just hosted Burnside as well, so that's another one where, again, how much do they push in that regard? But to me, this feels like a more classic Egg Bowl battle, and obviously, geographically, Mississippi State has a lot of advantages here, but a lot of unfortunate turnover there on the coaching staff, given the tragedies of the end of last year. New receivers coach as well there at Mississippi State. So you wonder, could those margins help Ole Miss in short order if he does want to come off the board, because he's still developing that relationship with some of the new coaches in place there in Starkville, including Chad Bumpus, the new receivers coach. So that'll be interesting to see relative to Ole Miss, but the Rebels are right in it as expected.
You said something in this, and I'm going to put you on the spot here and just ask you just a blind question. But after Sunterian Perkins last year just did everything for Raleigh, won a state championship, everybody knew about his versatility and everything's going on. Do you think these larger programs are kind of looking at Mississippi and seeing the versatility that these star players have to play as a strength?
100%. It is a strength. Just like we talk about not specializing in one sport at the high school level, I'm a big fan of not specializing in one position. Not only because if you're a two-way guy, you get advantages against your opposition because you're occupying that role a lot of times relative to Perkins, who was a great running back and linebacker simultaneously, and obviously one has to combat the other no matter when you're lining up on the field. But on the other end of it, yeah, you don't want an over polished skill set. I talk about polish a lot in my evaluations. You don't want the recruit who is kind of maxed out at any one position with the intricacies of that position. One, because naturally college coaches don't feel great about youth coaches and high school coaches relative to their own ability. And some of those developmental traits could turn into bad habits when they're so kind of locked in. If they're more on the raw side, Stephen, now you can manipulate and mold in your direction. And obviously when you're at the collegiate level, it's within your system and your scheme specifically. So that's what most college coaches prefer, especially if other sports are included, like it is here in Burnside's case. So yeah, Mississippi's putting out a whole lot of versatile, multi-sport, multi-positional athletes, and it's something that I think a lot of schools are taking notice of. That's why we're seeing a lot of these Mississippi recruitments begin to ascend well before the summer months and their senior seasons, which is typically the case when you're kind of playing catch up. Like, oh, we didn't realize the state was this loaded. I do think everybody kind of recognizes that it's very loaded, and that will once again be reflected by these increased scholarship offers and the coaches that hit the road in the month of May to get fresh eyes on a lot of these guys. So that versatility goes right along with that.
Yeah, and I tell people all the time, back when I worked at rivals.com and saw these kids all the time, that if you get a 5-star out of Texas, take that 5-star out of Texas, because you know that he's been coached well. He is a plug-and-play player. But if you're looking at a low 4-star, if a high 3-star out of Texas, I would rather have the one out of Mississippi, because there's a good chance that high 3-star, low 4-star is really close to their ceiling, and Mississippi is kind of just scratching the surface of their ability.
Yeah, I love that. It's definitely not a 1-to-1 kind of thing, but yeah, I mean, for the large portion of everybody's recruiting process, yeah, you're going to spend more time, resources, energy, information in the state of Texas. So yeah, when you're banking on guys from an athletic standpoint, yeah, I agree with you. I hadn't heard that in that exact explanation, but laying it out, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Jeremy Scott. And we've talked about Norreal White on the last show, so we're going to skip him as a wide receiver. But Jeremy Scott is the 4th wide receiver that gets ranked. He's out of Callaway. He's a 3-star player, kind of a mid 3-star right now, but Ole Miss really likes him. And looking at his frame, this looks like a kid that could really play and is poised to kind of shoot up the rankings as this goes.
Yeah, and another two-way guy, right? Big safety, big DB on defense, but obviously when you're 6'3", 6'4", that offensive intrigue is going to carry you from a recruiting standpoint. And Scott really carries that on offense. Obviously, great length, great ball skills, very comfortable with the football in the air. Still figuring out some other elements to his game, but he's kind of slender and sneaky, I'll say. I think that's the right way to put it. He doesn't look like he's running past a lot of guys, but when you watch the tape, he is with that long stride, and that's a way to beat the defense down the field. But he's a little better than I expected him to be after the catch. There's some nice instincts here within his game as well. Real skinny right now, 175, 180 or so. Obviously, that's a part that's going to fill out. And I think he profiles as that classic boundary receiver that we've seen have so much success at Ole Miss, regardless of coaching staff, regardless of the roster. Those boundary guys just make a lot of plays in Oxford. You think of 50-50 balls, you think of back shoulder balls, and that's something we know Lane Kiffin really covets on the outside. And like you said, Ole Miss really likes him. You know, his recruitment's being headed up by Derek Nix personally. So I do think that this is one of those, especially in state, you feel good about if he sticks to this kind of early decision timeline. If he doesn't, though, I think it could get interesting for him. He's a Callaway kid, as you mentioned, a very well seen high school. So if his recruitment lasts through the month of May and that spring evaluation period, I think his potential to blow up is as high as any of the other players we've talked about today, even though he's kind of the most under the radar one as things currently stand. Because you get eyeballs on this kid, you start digging into the tape, and Jeremy Scott becomes a guy that profiles better with time. And I think as schools start to miss on other receivers and reshuffle their board, he's a guy that's easy to sell to. If you're a position coach, selling him to the OC, and if you're an OC, selling him to the head coach, you say, hey, 6'4", 180, multi-sport, two-way guy, just scratching the surface on his overall ability. I think Jeremy Scott's a big-time stock-up guy.
And one thing that I see that nobody's going to pay attention to on this one is I think Jeremy Scott has the potential to grow an inch or two, 6'5", 6'6", 220 pounds, 230 pounds, and all of a sudden he is that flex tight end that is extremely in vogue in college football and pro football right now.
100%. And look, there's a lot of foundational elements that you like here, not only on the football field, but with the body control that he possesses or that he has to possess in other sports, right? Track and field, he's a high jumper. So what does that mean? Precision, calculation, understanding your own limitations. Also plays baseball, which might bring some AJ Brown comparisons. Probably a little early for any of that stuff, but again, you start to understand why he tracks the ball so very well. But yeah, you start to talk about growth on top of it. You're right. We don't talk about that enough with guys who already physically look bigger than most. But yeah, he's still got another year of high school ball before he ever gets to college. And we've seen some of those guys sprout up kind of overnight. So yeah, he could develop into a Deuce Robinson #1 type of blended receiver, tight end type of prospect. And if that happens, sky really is the limit for not only his recruitment, but obviously his ceiling as a collegiate athlete.
Yeah, it's why when people look at star rankings this early in the process, and then in their junior year, it's a guide. It's a grain of salt. It's something that you can base it off of because so much is going to change in the next 9 months. And right now, in mid-February, in the state of Mississippi, there's 18 players ranked on the On3 consensus. 14 of them are a 4-star or better on one of the recruiting services. It's absolutely uncanny. I talked to you a couple weeks ago saying, hey, could this state get to 15 this year? Well, now I'm asking if they can get to 20. It's amazing.
Yeah, because you could see kind of a natural ascent for some of these guys, right? Mm-hmm. A few months ago with you, we talked about Isaiah Autry. I'm like, hey, this is a guy at OT that you start to look at his athletic profile and more scholarship offers are going to fly in. And sure enough, Alabama, LSU, a bunch of other schools have jumped in here recently. He'll get the blue chip bump. We talked about Anthony Maddox last week, quarterback, just committed to A&M, coming off of his first year as a varsity starter. You start to dig into his ability a little bit more as a dual threat. His ranking will inevitably go up. We just talked about Jeremy Scott. He's another no-brainer bump candidate to 4 stars. So, yeah, I do think this class in Mississippi has the potential to stretch that thing to 15 or 20 blue chippers before the season begins. And we all know in the state of Mississippi, once Friday Night Lights start to open up, another group of players will emerge or increase their own standing there simultaneously. So, yeah, the state is in really good shape for the class of 24, and it's going to continue to push in that direction for quite a while, in my opinion.
Yeah, in my opinion also is if a high school recruit is being recruited and can play in a national all-star game, choose the Under Armour game. It's 30 minutes down the road from me. I'll be there. I'll take pictures. I'll do whatever you need to do. I'll give you all the coverage you need. Just don't worry about San Antonio. Let's just hang out in Orlando. John will be there. We'll have a lot of fun. It'll be on ESPN. It'll be great. Right, John?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm a Florida guy. So, yeah, keep it in the Southeast and we'll get eyeballs on you. And then you get to go to Disney World and hang out too. Why not?
Yeah, and also a lot of these guys that we're talking about, they're going to be at the Under Armour camp that's in about a week or so in Atlanta. So that'll be when invites start going. So I'll paying attention to that. I'm hoping like Kamarion Franklin and Braylon Burnside and those guys are down here because I like to see them. I like to actually make eye contact and see exactly what they can do. It's like whenever we were down here and Suntarian walked in the room and you saw him completely without pads and completely out of that, and he's like, that guy's a dude.
That's a guy. Like, even if you don't know who he is, and of course we did, you're like, oh, who's that? Yeah, that's a guy. And when you stand out amongst All-Americans, yeah, I think it says plenty about what you could be physically at the next level, and that's why a lot of folks, including both of us, expect Perkins to hit the ground running and then some on the defensive side of the ball.
Exactly. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Make sure you check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Everything you need to know about college basketball in one place. You can hear from experts, insiders, coaches, and players. And right now, Ole Miss basketball is actually relevant on that show. So it's Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much, John, for stopping by. We'll keep doing it. We're gonna overcook this 2024 recruiting class, and it's going to be oh so much fun to do it.
Sounds good, my friend. Looking forward to it.
All right, bud.